Welcome back. It is June 25 of 2015. We're going to take a look at The True and the Evident by Franz Brentano. It's a series of lectures on his Epistemology. So it gives us a chance to take a look from a different point of view on his philosophy. We're going to begin with the most important of the lectures, the concept of truth. A lecture given to the Vienna Philosophical Society in 1889. It's really his foundational epistemology, so we're going to tackle that particular lecture first. He begins with axioms and equivocations, and there are 10 fundamental axioms. Number 1, an insight must always be true. 2, every psychical act has an immanent object of belief as a reference. 3, a judgment is true if it attributes to an object that which is combined within it. 4, simple true judgment is never opposed to error, never opposed by error, but simply opposed by agnosia, ignorance. 5th, true judgment posits that which is combined with an object, that which constitutes that object. 6, everything that can be thought falls into the emotional classes of love and hate. And 7, we never look for more than that which is really given in sensate experience. And 8, formal truth is not separate from material truth. 9, we cannot do comparison judgments until things are first known to us. And 10, the general criteria are acquired through intuition. That's our starting point. So it gives us 10 basic axioms, and then it gives us 3 types of linguistic phenomena of equivocation. There are accidental equivocations of naming generalizations. There are analytical equivocations of judgment as psychognosy, and there are conceptual equivocations of lifting generalizations to signification. So that's kind of our starting point. The main work is going to be in the second moment. First moment just kind of lays down his presuppositions, and then we get into the work in the second moment of the threefold psychical judgment. So let's take a look at the actual work of judgment. There are 3 modalities of judgment. There is existential judgment, judging the coming into being of a sensate object, the being in itself of the sensate object. There's analytic judgment, our judgment of necessity concerning relation. And then there's eschatological judgment, judgments of indirect dependence on the subject, which evaluates latency and possibility within the sensate realm. And so let's take a look at those 3 types of judgment. And let's begin with existential judgments or equivocations. It's the positing of the simple aletheia truth of an intuition of generalization. We begin with generalization, not conceptualization. They're limited to the singular language of generalization. It articulates the one proper sense that abbreviates all the other senses in a sensate object. And it's equated with the discovery of the content of a sensate object. Its measure of truth is its measure of correspondence. And we acquire the content of the sensate presentation of appearance, basically. So our acquisition equals the internalization of a sensate presentation as the object in itself. So thing in itself is already the inauguration of the act of psychognosy. It is a cognition at the realm of psyche. Even acquiring the thing in itself is a psychognosy act. So the sensate object becomes the transcendental object, which has been internalized, but it still is an objective presentation. It is objectively real. This inaugurates the faculty of knowledge, the faculty of knowing, and it leads to that acquisition of a lexical network of generalization names. It's a lexicon of generalizations, very basic level. But at this point, after acquiring this lexical content and storing it loosely in mechanical memory, we're ready to transition to the analytic equivocation, or the analytic judgment. So if we move on to analytic judgment, we enter the realm of formal reality that is distinct from objective reality. Belief is always formally present in the self. The very first analytic moment is going to be to recollect the believed generalizations that are stored in mechanical memory as an internal psychical objective presentation. So now sensate objective presentation becomes psychical objective presentation. And this internal presentation already possesses the in itself intentionality of the object, which is intrinsic to the sensate object itself. So the in itself is not something that is sensate. The in itself is an internalization. It is the beginning of psychognosy. That's important to understand because there's a lot of confusion thinking that the in itself is always the objectively sensate outside of the self, and then it becomes an internalization. But for Brentano, the in itself of an object is already a psychognostic act. It is already gnosis, cognition at the level of psyche. So psychognosy acquires the in itself of the object. It becomes that psychical objective presentation within the self as a psychical objective reality. And it becomes the in itself of the sensate object. The actual in itself intentionality of the sensate object. So it's a very important distinction to understand. Brentano is very different here from most other thinkers in saying that the in itself of an object is a psychognostic act. It is already psychical even at the point of the acquisition of the in itself. The in itself is actually an internalization. That's a pretty key point for Brentano. Second analytical moment is going to be the he uses the Greek from Aristotle, symploke, noameton, synthesis, and symploke means lustful embrace. Noematon is a thought as design. Synthesis is synthesis or collective placing together. So in other words, the three together means a desired sign model is formed out of the lexical names in mechanical memory. We form a desired sign model. The existential objects stored in mechanical memory are raised to the level of categorical objects now. They gain signification. We raise them up from generalization to signification. So the second analytical moment is the moment of judging in order to reach signification and actually forming a thought as design model, a collective thought as design model that is very emotively embraced, not just cognitively embraced, but also emotively embraced as a desired sign model of true generalizations that have been lifted to signification. That moves us on to 3b, the eschatological equivocations. The psychical act model elicits an emotional component. The model that can be thought enlists the emotional classes of love and hate. As we already mentioned, the loved become equated with the good within the self. So our emotive slant, enjoined with the psychical model, creates a harmonious motivational base of value, a motivational base of attestation that actually empowers and directs our ethical action and our ethical take on the world. The psychical model becomes the truth. It actually reaches, even though we're at the level of psyche, for Brentano, it reaches the level of concept. It becomes concept. So we're dealing with a signification, a psychical act sign model, but for Brentano, the psychical act model has reached the level of concept. That's important to understand because many others would make us transition into gnosis and the composition threshold, whereas Brentano stops at the Dekunta threshold of Aristotle he stops at psyche, but he says this does reach concept. So he's saying we have reached concept when we form the cyclical act model of significations. It all began, though, with the intuitive general criteria. A very important lesson from Brentano, because the key is that those first generalizations that we intuitively acquire become internalized in order to understand the in itself of the object. The in itself as a given is internalized. It becomes subjective. That's a big step, because usually the subjective moment for everyone else doesn't begin until that second analytical step. It doesn't count for the first analytical step. But for Brentano, the in itself is a cyclical, psychognostic act, and it is an internalization. So objectivity itself is an internalization. Think of it as the other end of it. Remember, positing is what? An internal externality before we act. So think of this first moment of the psychical objectivity as also an internal externality. Think of it as a companion to positing. It's the other end of the spectrum on positing. It's an internal externality of a psychical, truly objective presentation. It's psychical objective presentation of the in itself of an object. That inherently held in itself intentionality that an object possesses is the in itself that we acquire in our very first initial psychical act of acquiring the objective presentation. But think of it in the same way you'd think about positing. Positing, the best description I've ever heard of positing is it's an internal externality. It's at that forefront of our mind, is that filter through which we view reality. Well, think of these psychical objective presentations as an internal externality. Think of them as an objective reality, internalized, but still retaining their objective reality as the in itself of the object. So it's a very important distinction for Brentano. It's something that is never addressed by any other thinker that I can think of, but it's a key point that the psychical objective presentation of the in itself of the object, it is an internalization. The in itself of the object is an internalization. It's not something simply possessed in the objective object. The objective object becomes internalized as psychical objective object, and that becomes the in itself of the object. The in itself, before it goes out of itself, is already an internalization. It's already a psychical internalization. That's key for understanding the concept of truth. You have to understand where it begins. It begins with an internal externality. So that gives us a first look at epistemology from Brentano on his lecture to the Vienna Philosophical Society in 1889.